My name is Helena Hart. I am 66 years old, a widow for nearly a decade, and for 30 years I have owned and lived in the same house in suburban Ohio. I never imagined that by mid-December I would be writing this, packing a suitcase, and walking away from what was supposed to be my sanctuary. I woke up bald that morning, my son's wedding day, and discovered a note mocking me. "Perfect look for you, pathetic old woman." The words pressed against my chest, colder than winter air. That very day, $100 million was about to be transferred, a sum I had every right to oversee as part of the family's trust. During the toast, I stood up. And that's when their smiles disappeared. Earlier that afternoon, my daughter-in-law had looked me in the eye and declared, "Christmas at your house, my whole family, only 20 people. You cook, I host." She smirked as though she were gifting me a burden rather than making a demand. I answered simply, "Perfect, because I won't be here. I'm off to a luxury resort." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. She froze. "I know what you are wondering. Did I really walk away from hosting my own family's Christmas? Yes. I refused to be their unpaid staff at my own home. The moment she laid down that rule, everything inside me shifted. I would not be their servant. In the hours that followed, I packed essentials, clipped off the security system's override code, and left behind empty shelves and a note. "Enjoy your perfect Christmas." I left the front door ajar, the lock still intact. I let the wind tug at the curtains like a quiet omen. I climbed into a cab with only a carry-on. The driver asked where I was headed. I said, "A resort far away. I will tell you later which one." Yet even as the tires rolled and the city receded, my mind remained in that house. The echoing hallway, the chill in the kitchen, the absent laughter, the sense of betrayal. Because this was no ordinary argument about holiday duties. Beneath the demand lay years of emotional labor without acknowledgement, manipulation without apology, and a toxic expectation that a mother's love must be free service. At the same time I was leaving, in the hush before the snow fell, I triggered a series of events that would upend everything. I had already been piloting a plan in secret. I had begun gathering evidence, statements, bank records. In the dim light of dawn, I recalled my research: merchant names, transaction amounts, suspicious email headers, hidden credit accounts. I whispered to myself in the taxi, "This isn't revenge, this is reclamation." I knew full well that when I left, chaos would ripple through the household, phones would ring, guests would arrive, frigid air would settle over a home unprepared. But I was ready to stay silent, to let absence speak louder than confrontation. You may ask, why such extremes? Because for years I had felt invisible. A house, anchored by my mortgage and labor, a hearth maintained by my nights and weekends. And when the time came for someone to notice, they treated me like a fixture, not a person. This holiday expectation was the final straw, an ultimatum for which I would not comply. If you're watching this, you might wonder how one moment of defiance can shake the foundations of a family. You might doubt that a woman nearing 70 can gather enough strength to challenge deep alliances, secrets, and financial tricks. But stay with me, because by the time I return, nothing will be as it was. If you believe that dignity is earned not by silence but by boundaries, you will understand why I chose this path. If you've ever felt used, betrayed, or erased in the name of family obligations, then you are not alone. Before I continue, I want to invite you to stay with me. Subscribe or follow this story and watch closely every detail I share. This is not a spectacle, but a reclamation of voice and a battle for what is just. The morning after I left, the phone calls started. I didn't pick up. I watched the notifications stack like untouched plates. 20 guests, no groceries, no plan, Just my son and his wife staring at the echo of a life they thought I would fill in for free. I checked in at the resort and set my phone to silent. The room was quiet, with clean lines and seafoam walls. The view overlooked a frozen garden. I sat on the edge of the bed, thinking about the years that led to this fracture. People like Sierra don't just become entitled overnight. Entitlement is fed, nurtured, enabled, often by someone who should have known better, and in this case, that someone was my son. Grant wasn't cruel, but he was careless. Not in the way a man forgets an anniversary, but in the way a person forgets the hands that held him up. As a boy, he used to wrap himself around my legs, giggling when I tried to stir the soup. He cried when I left him with a babysitter. Back then, I thought love would be enough to keep us close. But boys grow into men, and some men grow into versions shaped more by ambition than affection. It had started months ago, little remarks that didn't sit right. Things like, Sierra's family knows people at the firm, or Eduardo might help me get into that real estate circle, but he needs to see that we can host well. Hosting well. That was always Sierra's term. A perfect Christmas, she'd say, as if it were a product on a shelf. Her voice would tighten when the topic of her parents came up. They were flying in from Arizona this year. She wanted champagne on arrival, coordinated napkins, a pianist, a fireplace selfie wall. But what she really wanted wasn't comfort. It was leverage. A flawless event to impress a family that still saw her as a child wearing borrowed pearls. And to get that, she needed me. My house, my labor, my compliance. But Grant, he should have known better. A few days before I left, I found him, standing in the dining room, checking his phone with a furrowed brow. I asked if he needed anything. He said no, but didn't move. I lingered, watching him shift his weight. Finally, he asked, "Mom, are you still using the big turkey roaster?" I didn't answer right away. He filled the silence with excuses. Sierra's dad is really particular. He's used to luxury, Mom. She just wants to prove she can manage it all. I turned from the window. Manage it all. With my house, my food, my hands, my time. He scratched the back of his neck. It's just one day. No, I said. It's not. That night, I sat in my room and thought about the language of expectation, about how often women like me are asked to disappear into generosity, about how often sons forget the quiet sacrifices that shape them. I made coffee at 2 a.m. and watched the cream swirl into the black. The fridge was humming, a low, tired sound. I stared at the family calendar, still pinned to the corkboard. December, covered in scrawled notes. None in my handwriting. It wasn't just about the turkey. It never is. The next day, I called Grant and asked him to come over alone. He arrived wearing that sheepish smile he always used when he knew he'd done something wrong but didn't want to admit it. I made tea, set it on the table, and sat across from him. "You need to tell me the truth," I said. He blinked. "About what?" "This Christmas. The list. The timing. The pressure. It's not about family, is it?" He paused. Then something shifted in his face. Resignation, maybe. He exhaled and leaned back in the chair. "Eduardo told me, if things go well, he might bring me into the hospitality deal he's brokering in Phoenix." My fingers tightened around the mug. "So you need your Christmas perfect to impress the rich family." I didn't say it like that, but that's what it is. He looked down. I just wanted to prove I could pull it off, that Sierra and I could handle something big. Her parents never thought I was good enough. This was my chance to show them I could stand on my own. By leaning on me. He didn't answer. I stood and walked to the window. Snow hadn't yet started falling, but the sky had that heavy gray tone, like a breath being held. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I let the silence hold the weight. "Do you know how many holidays I spent making sure you had everything?" I asked. "Even when we couldn't afford much, I stitched everything together with late nights and discount bins, and I never once asked for applause." I know you didn't. Do you? I turned. Then why is it so easy for you to offer me up as the help? His mouth opened, then closed. It's not just Sierra, I said. It's you. You handed over the keys to my life like they were part of a dowry. I didn't mean, but you did. You needed me to play the part so you could play the success. He slumped in the chair, smaller than he'd looked just days ago. What do you want me to say? Nothing, I said. I want you to listen. He did. I told him I was leaving, that I would not be present for the gathering, that I would not shop or cook or clean or decorate, that the burden would no longer be mine to carry. He stood up, panic rising. You can't just go. I can, and I will. Sierra will flip. She already has, but I won't be here to see it. You're abandoning your family over one event? I took a deep breath. This isn't about one event. It's about 5 years of being treated like a fixture. It's about being invisible until you need something. It's about you standing here, trying to guilt me into a performance. His face darkened. So this is punishment? No, I said softly. This is protection. He left not long after. I watched from the window as he stood in the driveway pulling out his phone, probably calling Sierra, probably saying words like unreasonable or stubborn. I didn't care. That evening, I pulled out the folder from the back of the filing cabinet, the one I had started keeping 3 months earlier when things first felt off. I had statements, receipts, copies of bills, emails, a spreadsheet with notes, and somewhere, tucked behind the paperwork, a handwritten letter I had written to myself. If no one else sees your value, you must still stand for it. I reread it twice. Then I poured a glass of wine, sat by the fireplace, and watched the flames. I thought about Grant as a boy, how he once gave me a crooked pinecone ornament and said, I made it for you because you always smile when the tree goes up. And now here we were. The tree already in the living room, dressed by someone else's taste, a smile I no longer wore. I went to bed that night without setting an alarm, and in the stillness I made peace with my decision. The next morning I began the quiet preparations that would change everything, not just for Christmas, but for every day after. I didn't expect the silence to feel so loud. The morning after Grant left, I moved through the house like a ghost. I boiled water for tea, though I never drank it. I opened the refrigerator and stared at the contents. Half a carton of eggs, milk expiring in 3 days, and a sealed pie Sierra had insisted on adding to the grocery list even though no one liked pecan. I closed the door and leaned against the handle, eyes closed. It hit me then, how empty the house sounded when it wasn't full of invisible labor. I sat down with a legal pad and drew a line down the center. On the left, I wrote, what I give. On the right, what I'm expected to. I listed things like groceries, guest linens, gift wrapping, setting up the folding chairs, baking the sugar cookies, putting the star on top of the tree after everyone else had gone home. Things no one ever asked for out loud, but always assumed would happen. I stared at the page. Then I added another category at the bottom. What I get. That part stayed blank for a long time. Eventually I wrote, criticism when I say no. It wasn't until that moment I realized how long I had been calling mistreatment by softer names. Stress. Obligation. Just trying to help. But the word I had been avoiding finally showed itself, stark and steady. Manipulation. It comes dressed like tradition, or duty, or guilt. It sounds like, we just thought you'd want to, or, but this is how you always do it, or, we were counting on you. It looks like your own hands doing all the work while someone else gets the applause. I walked to the front window and looked out at the driveway. There were faint tire marks still visible from where Grant's car had pulled out the day before. I wondered if he even noticed the garbage bins I had taken out for the last 10 years without ever being asked, or the way I always stocked his favorite creamer when he came by, or how I still kept a photo of his high school graduation on the mantle, even though he once told me to get with the times. I went upstairs and pulled out the suitcase from the back of the closet. Not the little overnight bag I used for weekend trips, the full one, the one I bought back when I thought I might travel after retirement, before Sierra's needs started swallowing my time. I laid it on the bed and opened it with a crisp zip. This time, I wasn't just going away for the holidays, I was drawing a line. Downstairs, I wrote a short note on the back of a shopping list. Please don't call. I'll be gone by morning. Wishing you the perfect Christmas you planned for. Then I folded it, propped it against the salt shaker on the kitchen island, and turned out the lights. The house sighed. Later that night, I stood at the kitchen sink, drying the last dish I would ever wash for them without thanks. I looked around and began collecting the items that mattered. My journal, my legal folder, a scarf my late husband gave me our last Christmas together. It still smelled faintly of cedar. I placed it carefully in the suitcase and zipped it closed. Then I unplugged the refrigerator. Not out of spite, but to remind them that things don't just run on their own. As I moved through the house, I noticed the little signs of my labor. Clean baseboards, restocked toilet paper, the extra set of batteries in the drawer. No one ever thanked me for refilling. I paused at the thermostat and lowered the heat to 60. I was no longer in charge of keeping them warm. At exactly 5:15 a.m., I stepped into a waiting cab. The driver glanced at the address and raised his eyebrows. "Big plans?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Finally." We rode in silence. As we pulled away, I looked back one last time. The porch light flickered slightly. Grant never did replace the bulb properly. I smiled. Small consequences for larger patterns. At the resort, the receptionist welcomed me with a warm smile, and a bellhop took my bag. The room overlooked a lake frozen solid in the December morning. The sun hadn't risen yet, but a soft glow pressed against the horizon. I let myself breathe. It was the first time in months I'd heard only my own heartbeat. I made a cup of hotel coffee, sat at the little table by the window, and opened my folder. There it all was. Printouts from the past 3 months, bank records, email printouts, screenshots, a charge for luxury glow skincare, $7,942. A new account opened under Grant's name, but with an email that matched Sierra's private online handle, a signed form using a distorted version of his signature. I stared at the evidence and whispered aloud, "This is not normal." It's strange how long we accept what hurts because it's dressed in the costume of family. Sierra had used Grant's identity to open multiple accounts, likely assuming no one would notice. And maybe Grant hadn't noticed. Maybe he truly didn't know. Or maybe he did and didn't want to confront it. Either way, the pattern was clear. My house, my name, my silence, used like currency. I picked up the pen and underlined a phrase in red ink. Grant's SSN tied to 4 purchases made through unverified portals. I texted Renee, the investigator. She replied within minutes. Confirmed. Digital paper trail links back to Sierra's device. Should I compile for Daniel? I answered, "Yes, thank you." And then I stared at the wall. I was no longer afraid, just exhausted. By the time the sun rose fully, I had written a full page of what I would no longer do. I will no longer say, "It's fine," when it's not. I will no longer be blamed for boundaries. I will no longer provide comfort at my own expense. I will no longer let family be used as a weapon. When I closed the journal, I felt lighter, not healed, but beginning to clear the debris. That afternoon, I received the voicemail. Grant's voice sounded strained. "Mom, you left. Sierra is freaking out. Everyone's coming early. The fridge is empty. What are we supposed to do?" Then after a pause, "Please call back." I didn't. Another came an hour later. "Where's the turkey? Did you take the tablecloths too? Why would you do this? You're ruining everything." Still, I didn't reply. Instead, I watched the snowfall begin. Soft at first, then steady. The kind that changes how the world sounds, muting everything, even footsteps. Later that evening, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was Lucia Vale. "Helena, dear, We arrived a bit early and, well, it appears there's been a misunderstanding. There's no food. No one seems to know what's going on. I just wanted to check in with you. Hope you're well." I smiled a soft exhale. Even the Queen of Image was starting to feel the cracks. I turned off the phone and placed it in the drawer. Then I went to the spa. When the steam rose around me and the eucalyptus kissed my skin, I felt something release. Years of unseen labor, of holding my tongue, of pretending not to notice when my time was spoken for without permission. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. Back at the room, I wrapped myself in a robe and looked at the mirror. For the first time in years, I saw only myself. No roles, no obligations, no lists of tasks, just a woman who had named the thing that haunted her. Emotional blackmail. That was the word. That was the crime. Not in a courtroom, but in the quiet theft of freedom, time, and dignity. I wrote one last line in my journal that night. If I'm blackmailing by not being your free employee, what have you done for 5 years? Then I turned off the light and slept deeper than I had in a decade. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The silence after the chaos had always been more telling. And that morning, after I stepped off the resort's balcony and glanced back toward the ocean, I remembered everything. It didn't start with Sierra's smirk or the phone call from Grant asking if the main oven worked. It started 2 months earlier, on a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday where the house hummed with something invisible. The dishwasher ran a bit louder than usual. My tea cooled before I could finish it. And the mail carried weight. Not emotional weight, literal weight. Inside a thick envelope addressed to H. Hart, buried beneath utility statements and catalogs, was my bank credit card statement. I hadn't used that card in years. My retirement funds were managed elsewhere. But it was the familiar logo that stopped me. Something was off. I tore it open slowly, methodically. Line by line, my eyes moved. 13724 Culinary Dreams Catering, 650. RSVP Custom Linen Rentals, 980 Appelbaum String Quartet, 31288. Spark and Bloom Event Floral, 19225 viewers. Taylor House Men's Formal Wear. None of it made sense. I had been home tending to my garden. I hadn't hosted anything, no parties, no brunches, no music, no guests. And I certainly hadn't hired a quartet. I placed the paper on the table. Steam from my forgotten tea blurred one of the amounts. The ink smudged softly under my fingertip like a bruise. I opened my laptop. That night, I went through 6 months' worth of archived statements, some delivered digitally, some sent to my old P.O. box, the one Grant offered to take care of last year, to simplify everything. The picture began to form, not with clarity, but with questions. A shadow of organization behind the chaos. Names repeated. Lushview Villas, Vale Interiors, Custom Paperie, Maison de Lumière, Lighting Rentals. Every charge reflected intention. I printed every statement, highlighted every dollar, tagged them with sticky notes. I didn't sleep that night, and it wasn't because I was upset. I was awake because I was focused. At dawn, I called Renee Dalton, a private investigator I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. She was a friend of a friend from my community garden days, back when I volunteered with families going through estate fraud issues. "Helena Hart?" she said over the phone, "still living off Ridge Lane?" "For now," I replied, "but someone else seems to be living off my accounts." "I'm listening." By Friday, Renee came over. She carried a gray leather folder, a small recording device, and wore no makeup. A sign, I'd learned, that a woman came to work, not to talk. I walked her through everything. "I'm not sure who exactly did what," I said, "but I know the signature on this authorization form isn't mine." She took it, tilted it under the light. "Classic forgery," she whispered. "Ballpoint pen, too uniform. Yours would show age. This is new." She nodded. "We'll start with the merchant trails." Over the next 2 weeks, Renee sent me silent updates. A screenshot of Sierra entering Bella Moore Bridal Studio, signing for $4,200 worth of gown fittings. A brief invoice from Damian Vale's real estate office listing non-refundable venue deposit paid via a card ending in 6624, mine. Surveillance footage from Petal and Pine Florist showing Grant picking up a sample bouquet. Audio from a phone call where Sierra told her cousin, "Of course we're not paying for the rehearsal dinner. His mom has the cards." I didn't cry. I didn't even feel betrayed, yet. What I felt was something far colder. The same sensation I felt when Robert, my late husband, once told me in a hospital hallway, "You'll have to carry all of this alone, Helena." He was right, but he had left me well equipped. Back then, I had taken over the estate books. I'd kept records of every investment, every deed, every trust. I knew the difference between reckless spending and deliberate redirection. This wasn't ignorance. This was orchestration. One day, I made a small mistake, or maybe it wasn't. I forwarded the wrong file, or rather, the right one, to Grant. He had requested my holiday recipe notes for Sierra's family planner. Instead, I attached the spreadsheet Renee had built, suspicious expenditure match log. It took them 23 minutes to respond. "Mom, did you send something to me by mistake?" he texted. I replied, "No mistake. Thought you'd want to see what's been cooking." No reply. That weekend, my kitchen went unused. Sierra didn't stop by. Grant canceled brunch. But I noticed something stranger. A delivery from Crisp Water Delivery Comers arrived. 2 crates, paid in cash, not their style. I checked the doorbell camera. A man I didn't recognize placed the delivery. I forwarded the footage to Renee. "New contractor," she noted, "probably trying to go off-grid now." She was right. By this point, I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was preparing for a storm. One morning, I visited Daniel Price, my estate attorney. He was cautious but attentive. I slid the gray folder across the table. "Daniel, I want to set up a new trust. I want complete power of attorney reversed, and I want 2 separate clauses added. One for removal of residence by breach of contract, and another for credit misuse beyond $100. He adjusted his glasses. "You're sure?" "I'm past sure. I'm ready." We spent hours crafting every clause. Every word was deliberate. If my house had become a stage for them, I would change the script. Later that evening, I wrote an email to Victor Ames, the bank representative overseeing my card. I explained everything, carefully, factually, emotion removed. He scheduled a phone call, and on that call he said, "Ms. Hart, based on your documentation and the signatures provided, it appears your authorization was bypassed through a delegated access system, unethical and prosecutable." I nodded. "Freeze the card," I said. "Leave one last transaction open." He paused. "Why?" "Because they're planning something. Let them try one more time." And they did. 2 days later, a charge of $9,740 appeared, labeled Venue Hold Vale Grand Pavilion. I smiled. Renee was already there that afternoon, pretending to be a curious client. She captured a conversation between Sierra and the event manager. "It's already paid," Sierra said, flicking her nails. "His mother doesn't even know." "Oh, we know," the woman replied. "That account was flagged." That same night, I sat in my living room. The house was quiet, clean. Cold in a way I had come to expect, but there was peace in the cold. I closed my eyes and pictured my old journals, the ones Robert used to gift me every New Year's, 1 page per day, no matter what. I opened one from 6 years ago, January 3rd. "Trust doesn't die loud, it goes quiet first." I underlined that line again, just once. Then I turned the page. The next morning, I called Daniel again. "Let's execute the documents," I said. "And the property deed?" "Transfer ownership to the trust, effective immediately." I exhaled. By the time the wedding week rolled around, the house was no longer legally mine. It was the trust's, and every action from now on would be defined by contract law, not guilt. That afternoon, I stood in the hallway, watching as Sierra waltzed in with a clipboard, assigning sleeping arrangements to her relatives. No one looked at me. I had become invisible in my own home, but invisibility is sometimes a shield. I returned to my room, took out the navy blue envelope with gold lining. Inside, the notarized trust paperwork, the recorded audio, the merchant logs, the new deed. I sealed it, marked it, to be opened. December 24th, 12 p.m. I placed it inside the kitchen drawer beneath the flower jars, the one Sierra never touched. The knock would come soon, and when it did, I wouldn't be the one opening the door. I woke before the sun. The clock read 4:27 a.m., but it felt like I'd already been awake for hours. I didn't reach for the light. I let the blue haze of early winter morning spill through the curtains, painting long lines across the bedroom floor. There was no birdsong yet, just the low hum of the heating system kicking in, unaware that the woman it was warming would no longer be home by sunrise. I sat at the edge of the bed for a moment, letting my feet touch the hardwood. It was cold, not the cruel kind, but the clear kind. A sharp reminder that I was still here, still alive, still capable of making a decision and seeing it through. When I finally stood, my body felt heavier than it should have, not from age, but from everything else. Downstairs, the refrigerator made that quiet knocking sound again. I'd meant to have it looked at, but every time I considered calling someone, another chore came up. Another person needed something. Another week disappeared. But not today. I moved through the kitchen with quiet purpose. My suitcase was already packed and waiting by the front door. I had gone through every cabinet the night before and removed what I had paid for, what I had stocked, what I had cooked with. Not out of pettiness, but to leave a vacuum, so they'd see the absence, feel it. I opened the fridge and stared inside. One nearly empty jar of mustard, a bruised apple, a bag of shredded cheese folded over itself and clipped with a bread tie. The shelves gleamed, cold and barren. It had never looked more honest. I took out the apple, looked at it for a moment, then placed it in the trash. It landed softly without a sound. Then I wrote the note. Black ink on the back of a grocery receipt I found wedged between the microwave and the cutting board. I didn't rewrite it. I didn't think it over. I just let my hand move. Enjoy your perfect Christmas. That was it. I folded it in half and propped it against the single salt shaker left on the center island. Everything else, even the napkin holder, had been removed. I left no centerpiece, no scented candle, no holiday cheer, just a message and the echo of cold air. The front door was already unlocked. I had disabled the automatic alarm system 2 nights earlier. Grant never knew the code had changed. They wouldn't realize it until they tried to leave and noticed their access was different. I slid into my coat, the long gray one with the stitched inner lining. My gloves were already in the pocket. I took one last look at the hallway, the framed picture of Grant as a toddler on a sled, the small cross-stitch above the light switch that read, "This kitchen is seasoned with love." I didn't take them down. Some reminders are best left behind. At exactly 5:00 a.m., the taxi pulled up, right on time. I wheeled my suitcase out to the porch. The driver didn't get out, but he watched me through the passenger side mirror. I didn't blame him. I probably looked like someone leaving something bigger than a house, and I was. I opened the trunk myself and hoisted the suitcase in. My knees complained, but I ignored them. The door clicked shut behind me with a sound that felt final. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Lakewood Spa and Retreat, reservation under Hart." He raised an eyebrow but didn't comment, just nodded and started driving. The city looked different at that hour. No traffic, no horns, just the occasional flicker of Christmas lights left on overnight. The snow from the day before had crusted over, giving every lawn the look of frosted glass. I leaned my head against the window. No one knew I was leaving. Not really. Not even Grant. Not even Sierra. They'd know soon enough. At the last red light before the highway, I turned my phone back on. 10 voicemails, 12 missed calls. I didn't check any of them. I just tapped a small app at the bottom of my screen and opened the security camera feed for the house. The kitchen was still dark. The note was still there. No one had noticed. Yet. The resort came into view just after 6:15, a quiet building wrapped in warm light. Snow had been brushed off the main walkway. A man in a red coat stood at the entrance with a clipboard. A bellhop wheeled out a cart ready to assist. As I stepped out of the cab, I felt something strange. My shoulders didn't hurt. They always hurt, every winter, from years of carrying groceries, of lifting turkeys, of rearranging furniture to make room, but now, nothing. I checked in, handed over my ID, smiled politely. "Welcome to Lakewood, Miss Hart. You're in room 407, Lakeview. Breakfast starts at 7. You'll find everything you need in the welcome packet. Shall I have your bag sent up?" "Yes, thank you." The elevator ride was silent. I was alone. The doors opened with a soft ding, and I stepped into a hallway that smelled like fresh linen and orange peel. My room was at the end. When I unlocked the door, I paused. Clean carpets, heavy drapes, a bed perfectly made, a fireplace controlled by a switch on the wall, the kind of quiet you only hear in places designed for recovery. I walked straight to the minibar and poured myself a glass of water, sat on the edge of the bed, looked out the window. The lake was frozen over completely. A lone bench stood by the shore, half covered in snow. I made a mental note to visit it later. Then I opened the folder I had packed in the suitcase. Inside, bank statements, utility bills, copies of credit reports, screenshots of spending summaries, all tagged with sticky notes in neat handwriting. One tab was marked Grant Suspicious Activity. Another, Sierra Usage Pattern. I pulled out a page showing a transaction from Luxury Glow, $7,942. I remembered the name. Sierra had once mentioned it casually, claiming it was a membership skincare boutique with VIP treatments. The receipt listed Grant's name as account holder. The signature on the document didn't match his. Renee, the private investigator, had helped me track the digital footprints. The IP address was linked to Sierra's phone. The email confirmation was sent to an alias, hearthhomeevents@protonmail.com. That address had never once been used by me or Grant. I picked up my phone and opened the last text from Renee. "Confirmed. Digital trail points to Sierra. You want me to forward this to Daniel and Victor?" I replied, "Yes, full package." I then texted Eduardo and Lucia, Sierra's parents. Short and simple. "Dear Eduardo and Lucia, I thought you'd like to see this before the 24th. Forwarding a few documents your way. Helena." I didn't attach anything. I let them wait, let them stew in uncertainty, just like I had for years. In the quiet of that morning, I began drawing the battle lines, not with noise, but with paper, with screenshots, with facts, with silence. I ordered room service, oatmeal, berries, and black coffee. While I ate, I watched the security cam feed again. The house was beginning to stir. Grant appeared in the kitchen. He rubbed his eyes, looked around, opened the fridge. His head tilted. He opened the freezer, the cabinets. He stood motionless for a moment, then called out. Sierra entered a few seconds later, clearly annoyed. She said something, lips moving fast. Then she walked to the refrigerator, yanked the door open, and slammed it shut. I could almost hear it through the screen. Grant looked at the counter. He saw the note, picked it up, read it. He didn't show it to Sierra. He folded it and tucked it in his pocket. That surprised me. By 7:20 a.m., I had 14 missed calls. At 7:42, Renee messaged, "Daniel confirms legal documents are ready. Want to meet on the 24th? I replied with a single word, "Yes." Then I opened the window a crack and let the cold morning air in. The view was quiet, still. No chaos, no demands, no performance. Just me, the truth, and the power that comes when you stop asking permission to rest. The first voicemail came at 6:04 a.m. I was sitting by the window in the resort's breakfast lounge, cradling a hot cup of coffee between both hands. Snow had started to fall, lightly at first, swirling in soft flurries across the lake. The world looked silent, covered in a blanket of newness. My phone vibrated once against the wooden table, then again, then again. I didn't check it, not immediately. A young couple at the table beside me was laughing over something on their phone, and their joy felt foreign. Not uninvited, just distant, like a language I hadn't heard in a long time. By 6:12, the vibrations turned to ringing. Call from Grant. I muted the phone, turned it face down. I knew what that call was. I had anticipated it like one anticipates thunder after the lightning. The moment when expectation meets consequence. The staff brought out oatmeal with warm cream and fresh berries. I stirred it slowly, listening instead to the snow tapping against the glass. When I finally looked at the screen again, I had 6 missed calls. At 6:17, a voicemail transcript populated on the lock screen. "Mom, where are you? Sierra says you left. The fridge is empty. People are on their way. Call me back." It sounded like the voice of a boy who'd forgotten his homework, not a grown man preparing to host 20 people in a house he hadn't stocked or cleaned. By 6:28, Sierra had left 3 voicemails of her own. Hers came with no salutation, no restraint. "This is insane. You think this is funny? My parents are flying in. There's nothing here. You took everything, even the baking pans. Who does that?" Another, "You are ruining everything. You can't just vanish and expect us to clean up the mess. This is your house. You owe us." I sipped my coffee and smiled, not out of cruelty, but clarity. For years, they'd treated my presence like an on-call service. Now, for the first time, they were experiencing the full weight of my absence. At 6:42, another message came in, this one from Lucia Valle. "Helena, I'm a bit confused. We arrived early, as per Sierra's note, but there seems to be nothing prepared. Grant says you had an emergency. Let us know how we can help." I put my spoon down and stared out at the lake. Ice was forming in thicker sheets now, each layer compounding upon the last, steady and unstoppable. It was how I'd built this plan, layer by layer. By 7:09 a.m., the calls were frantic. Grant's voice cracked in one message. "Mom, what happened? Where did you go? The turkey's not here. There's no coffee. Did you really take the tablecloths? I don't understand. You've never done this before." Exactly. That was the point. At 7:16, I received a group message. It was Sierra, Grant, and Olivia, Sierra's younger cousin. The message read, "This is not okay. Guests are arriving. We're improvising. But seriously, this is not what family does." I could have replied. I didn't. Instead, I opened the security app again. The kitchen was full now, 6 people bustling around, some in coats, some already annoyed. I saw Isabel standing near the fridge with her arms crossed. Eduardo was pacing in the living room, phone in hand. A young man, maybe a boyfriend of a cousin, was trying to hang garland with no ladder. Sierra was in the center of it all, pointing, flailing. Grant stood by the sink, expression unreadable. He didn't move much, just stood there. At 7:30, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, the transcript appeared. "Helena, it's Damien. I don't want to overstep, but what exactly is going on? We're here. There's confusion, and people are starting to speculate. If there's something we need to know, I'd appreciate the truth." The truth. It wasn't that I had left. It was that I had always been there, and they never saw me. At 7:40, I replied to Damien, "Everything happening now is the result of choices that were made long before I left. No tricks, no sabotage, just reality. His reply came a minute later. Understood. No punctuation. But that word was heavy. It sat differently from the rest. The house continued to swirl on the security feed. I watched as Sierra attempted to coordinate a grocery run, only to realize the nearest market didn't open until 9:15 a.m. They began pulling out delivery apps on their phones, but with no verified account set up, no saved addresses, and no delivery slots available within the hour, the walls began to close in. It wasn't magic. It was work. It was planning, effort, mental load, invisible preparation that I had done for years without acknowledgement. At 8:05, a cousin knocked over a vase. I heard the shatter through the audio feed. At 8:10, Grant took a walk outside in the cold with no jacket on. At 8:15, Sierra cried in the powder room. By 8:25, Lucia took charge and began making a list. She asked, loudly enough for the camera to catch it, "Why wasn't this already handled?" Silence. Then Isabel's voice. "Because Helena's not a servant, and apparently no one else knows how to lift a finger." I sat back in my chair, my breakfast long finished. That sentence would carry farther than any confrontation ever could. By 8:40, the group decided to order 20 large pizzas. It would take over an hour. Sierra protested. Eduardo said nothing. He just looked tired. At 8:58, I got a final voicemail from Grant. "Mom, I get it. I don't know why it took this, but I get it. We relied on you for everything, not just for Christmas. Always. And we never said thank you. Or even saw it. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm sorry." I replayed that message twice. I didn't cry. I didn't soften. But I did feel something shift. There, in that quiet room overlooking the lake, I had finally been heard. Not because I raised my voice, but because I withheld it. I typed a reply. Short, precise. It wasn't magic. It was work. And then I put the phone down. I walked to the fireplace and turned the switch. Flames danced to life behind the glass. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, I stretched out on the couch, wrapped myself in a blanket, and closed my eyes. They had their chaos. I had my clarity. At 10:41 a.m., I heard the knock. I wasn't at the house, of course. I was sitting in the quiet of my resort room, the fire gently ticking behind me, a small cup of mint tea cooling at my side. I had just returned from a slow walk by the lake, bundled in a thick scarf, watching the snow press gently into the wooden bench by the shore. But I felt it. 2 steady raps echo through my chest like a bell I didn't know I'd been waiting for. I turned to my phone, tapped the security app, and pulled up the live video feed. Front door camera, 2 figures standing firm on the porch. Eduardo Valle, Lucia Valle. Not Grant. Not Sierra. Eduardo was dressed in a long charcoal coat, black gloves tucked under one arm, scarf looped once and neat. Lucia wore a camel wool wrap, her hair pinned, her face unreadable. Behind them, stepping slightly to the left, was Renee Dalton. She wore no smile, just a clipboard, gloves, and a steady gaze, and to the right, almost out of frame, was Victor Ames. Victor, the banker. The door didn't open right away. The knock came again. 2 slow, deliberate knocks, not impatient, not demanding, just inevitable. Inside the kitchen feed, I saw Sierra flitting between relatives, half shouting, half apologizing. The pizzas hadn't arrived. The wine had run out. Someone had spilled cranberry sauce on the linen she'd insisted be heirloom worthy. It wasn't heirloom. I'd bought it from a clearance bin 3 years ago. Grant was by the window. He saw them first. He didn't call out. He just stared. Sierra came up behind him, speaking quickly, gesturing toward the oven. Her hair was frizzed, cheeks flushed. She followed his gaze. Her lips parted slightly, and then she froze. On the feed, I watched her walk slowly to the door. Her hand hovered above the doorknob for a moment, then pulled it open. No greeting. Eduardo stepped forward and said something I couldn't hear. Lucia nodded once. Sierra tried to speak, but her words stumbled. They didn't ask to come in. They entered. Behind them, Renee and Victor followed. The door closed. I switched to the living room camera. 20 people scattered in mismatched groupings, cousins on couches, uncles near the fireplace, a toddler asleep in someone's lap. Isabel was standing by the staircase, arms crossed again, one eyebrow arched with the kind of satisfaction only clarity can bring. Eduardo didn't raise his voice. He cleared his throat and said, "We're not here to celebrate." All eyes turned. Sierra tried to interject. He held up one hand. Just one. "There will be no support," he said. "This becomes a family intervention." It landed like thunder. Lucia stepped forward next. "We were misled," she said, her voice even, "about who organized this, who contributed, who carried the load." Someone, one of the cousins, whispered, "Oh, damn," under his breath. Sierra flushed. "I was trying to—" she began, but Lucia shook her head. "You were trying to perform," she said. "But performance without integrity collapses the moment it's challenged." Grant moved to the side, half sitting on the edge of the armchair. His hands were folded tightly. He didn't defend her. Not this time. Victor, the banker, cleared his throat next. "There are a number of financial discrepancies involving the Hart family accounts. In particular, several credit lines opened under Grant Hart's name, with transactions traced back to IP addresses and devices registered to Sierra Vale Hart." There was a collective inhale in the room. Isabel leaned slightly forward, as if she'd known this would come but still relished the moment it did. Sierra looked around, waiting for someone to interrupt. No one did. Victor continued. "These findings have been submitted to legal counsel. Daniel Price will be arriving shortly with trust documents and a recommendation for how to proceed." I could see Sierra's lips form the word Daniel, but no sound came out. Renee stepped forward. Calm, composed, she handed Eduardo a slim folder and addressed the room. 3 months ago, Helena Hart began noticing discrepancies in household spending, utility overlap, and private accounts. I was hired to investigate. What we found was consistent misuse of identity, financial access without permission, and documents forged using digital signatures that do not match verified records. Lucia's voice came again, softer now. This wasn't an oversight. This was calculated. Grant finally spoke. "I didn't know." The room turned. He looked smaller somehow, deflated. Not defeated, but revealed. "I didn't know about the accounts, about the signatures, about the money. I knew about the Christmas plans. I knew they weren't fair. I didn't stop it. That part is mine." There was a long pause. Renee closed her folder. "I've said what I came to say. I'll be making myself available for Daniel's meeting." She turned and left the room without waiting for acknowledgement. Victor nodded to Eduardo and followed. Silence settled in the living room like snowfall. It was Isabel who finally moved. She walked to the center, picked up a folded napkin, and said, "Anyone still hungry can help themselves to the cold pizza." Laughter broke out, sharp, uneasy, but real. Sierra turned to Lucia. "Are you seriously taking her side? She left. She sabotaged us." Lucia's voice didn't rise. She stepped away, and in doing so, she revealed everything. "But she left me to clean up the mess." "No," Lucia said. "She stopped cleaning up yours." I closed the app. The fire beside me had dimmed slightly. I added another log and watched it catch. It wasn't about who yelled the loudest, or who had the last word. It was about who could sit still while the truth did the work. I sipped my tea and looked out at the lake. That knock, those 2 slow raps, had not been a request for entry. They had been a reckoning. The first box of pizza arrived at 11:31 a.m. It came in a stack of 5. Greasy cardboard, red lettering, already growing cold by the time the driver handed them to the nervous young cousin at the door. I watched the whole thing unfold from my screen, still at the resort, sipping a second cup of mint tea and scribbling down notes. They were running out of options, and they knew it. The camera feed showed the kitchen counters littered with takeout containers, napkins wadded into cups, and half-empty wine bottles that had been opened far too early. Isabel had taken a position at the head of the kitchen island, arms folded, not saying much. She didn't need to. She was waiting. Daniel arrived just after noon. The camera outside showed him walking up the porch calmly, briefcase in hand, scarf neat, not a hair out of place. He knocked once. Not like Eduardo had earlier. This was business, authority cloaked in understatement. Sierra answered, visibly smaller now, her posture collapsed inward. He said nothing. She stepped aside. He entered. Inside the kitchen, the temperature shifted. People stepped back without being asked. A few Vale relatives left the room altogether. Isabel stayed. Daniel opened the briefcase and took out a single folder. No theatrics, no ceremony, just documents delivered with clinical precision. Before we proceed, he said, voice calm, everyone should be aware that what I'm about to disclose has already been submitted for legal review. It involves credit misuse, forged documentation, and statements falsely issued under another party's authority. No one moved. Sierra started to speak. Isabel raised one finger. Let him finish, she said. Daniel placed 2 sheets on the counter. One was a scanned contract for a personal credit line opened 4 months prior, under the name Grant Hart. The other, a printed email showing a message sent to a financial services company with the subject line, authorization to use Helena Hart's estate as collateral. I could see Sierra's face flush crimson. Daniel tapped the paper. The account was opened using Grant Hart's social security number, but from a device registered under Sierra Vale Hart's Apple ID. The email address used was heartlegacyfundudgemail.com, an account that does not belong to Helena Hart, nor is it traceable to any of her devices. Lucia sat down. Eduardo didn't. Isabel stepped forward, scanned the page, and said, "That's not Grant's signature." Grant moved, just a little. I didn't know, he said. I didn't sign anything like that. I swear. Sierra turned to him. You said you'd let me handle it. I didn't know you meant fraud, he snapped. Isabel picked up the second page and held it to the light. This font, this isn't a system-generated document. You typed this, didn't you? You copied language from other emails and pasted it here. Silence. Then Sierra said, "It was just to get pre-approval. Nothing was actually transferred." Victor Ames, who had returned silently during the explanation, cleared his throat. "That's not how banks see it," he said. "An attempt to defraud using someone else's name, particularly in writing, is prosecutable, regardless of whether funds were disbursed." Sierra opened her mouth, then closed it. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Isabel laid the paper down gently. "Let me say this clearly," she said. "You used your husband's identity to open accounts. You forged documentation to tie Helena's estate into your illusion of credibility. And you did it not out of desperation, but vanity. Because you wanted a perfect Christmas. Because you wanted control." Sierra's voice cracked. "You don't understand what it's like. Always being measured, always being compared to—" Isabel didn't blink. "To what? Expectations you invented? Because no one here asked you to impersonate financial legitimacy. You did that on your own." Grant stepped back from Sierra slowly, like someone realizing they were standing on cracked ice. "She told me we needed to show confidence," he said. "She said we were just putting in structure to attract the Vale investment." Lucia raised her head at that. "Excuse me," she said. "You thought we were what? Investors in your marriage?" Isabel chuckled, a sound so dry it barely landed. Renee stepped into view now, folder in hand. She had remained silent until then. I traced the email headers, IP address links to the home Wi-Fi. Time of access, 2:17 a.m., 3 nights before Helena confronted Grant. She laid a photo on the counter. Sierra in the kitchen, laptop open, time-stamped in the corner of the security footage. Sierra lunged toward the photo. Renee blocked her hand before she could touch it. "Don't," Renee said. "This is now part of legal record." Eduardo finally spoke again. His voice was slower, heavier. "You used my daughter's marriage as a business transaction," he said. "You stole trust from Helena, from Grant, from all of us." Sierra shook her head violently. "You're making this bigger than it is." "No," Isabel interrupted. "We're naming it. That's different." The pizzas remained untouched. Boxes open, cheese congealing, a line of soda cans beating condensation onto the counter. The kitchen smelled of everything but Christmas. Grant moved toward the center of the room. "I want to be clear. I didn't know, but I enabled it. I didn't question where the money came from. I didn't ask who signed what. I just let it happen." He turned toward the camera. "I don't know if he knew I was watching, but I was. I don't deserve forgiveness," he said, "but I want accountability." Renee nodded once. "Then it starts with transparency." She handed him a second folder. Inside, a breakdown of every account opened under his name, every charge, every login, every location match. One merchant name repeated, Luxury Glow, over $7,000 in skincare products. Another, Velvet Room Events, $2,000 in down payments for party rentals, none of them refundable. Grant flipped through the pages slowly, then closed the folder. "I'll pay it back," he said. "All of it." Isabel spoke again. "That's not enough." He looked at her. "What else?" "You give up control of the estate. You consent to the trust being sealed against access without dual signature. You remove your name from all authorizations involving Helena's property." He nodded. Sierra whispered, "You can't be serious." He didn't answer. Lucia stood, finally. "I believe this gathering is over," she said. "We came for Christmas. What we found was something else entirely." She walked to the counter and picked up a slice of pizza. Then she placed it back down, still warm but no longer appetizing. One by one, guests began to leave. Quietly, no yelling, just coats being retrieved, shoes slipped on, silence stretching between movements. Within 15 minutes, the house was nearly empty. Sierra sat on the couch, unmoving. Grant stood in the doorway, folder still in hand. Isabel lingered. She walked to the fireplace and picked up a framed photo of the last family Christmas. Helena in the background, blurred mid-movement, carrying a tray. Sierra center stage, smiling, raising a glass. Isabel studied it, then turned it face down and placed it on the mantel. "It was never your house," she said softly. And then she left. I sat alone in my room, the fire beside me crackling faintly. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't filed charges. I hadn't posted a public letter or called a meeting. I had simply stepped away. And in the absence, the truth had walked in on its own, like a knock at the door. I returned home on the night of December 24th. Not quietly, not secretly, but deliberately, with measured steps and a purpose no one could deny. The car ride back from the resort was silent. Daniel sat beside me, his briefcase resting between us like an anchor. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. Everything had already been said. Everything else would be stated on paper. Snow was falling, not in flurries now, but in soft, wide flakes that muffled the world. The roads were nearly empty. People were home, with family, celebrating what they believed to be peace. I had no illusion about that word anymore. As we pulled up to the house, the porch light was on. I hadn't left it that way. Someone, likely Grant, had turned it on as a kind of offering, or perhaps a warning. Daniel stepped out first. His shoes crunched on the salted concrete. I followed, slower, breath visible in the air. The suitcase wheels thudded softly behind me. When I knocked, I didn't expect anyone to answer right away, but the door opened almost instantly. Grant stood there in a wool sweater that hung too loose, like it no longer fit the man he had been pretending to be. His eyes dropped to the briefcase, then back to me. "Hi, Mom." "Grant." He stepped aside. Daniel and I entered without fanfare. The house was warm, but there was a tension to it, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. In the living room, Sierra sat curled on one side of the couch, her shoulders tight, arms crossed, mouth set. Lucia and Eduardo were seated in the chairs opposite, each holding mugs they hadn't touched. Isabel leaned against the far wall, hands tucked into her coat. No one stood. No one smiled. Daniel placed the briefcase on the coffee table and clicked it open. "I'll be brief," he said. "This concerns the legal status of the property and Helena Hart's estate." No one interrupted. He pulled out a set of documents neatly clipped, thick with attached forms and official seals. 3 months ago, Daniel continued, Ms. Hart began proceedings to protect her assets from unauthorized use or misrepresentation. As of this week, her home and primary estate have been transferred into an irrevocable family trust. He laid down the first sheet. "This house," he said, tapping the page, "is now protected under that trust. It cannot be sold, refinanced, or mortgaged without her explicit, written consent." Sierra flinched. Grant sat down slowly. Daniel continued. "This trust was signed, notarized, and filed with the county registrar. Certified copies are enclosed. An independent third-party trustee has been appointed." I stepped forward and said, "That trustee is me." Sierra's voice finally emerged, thin and sharp. "You mean, we live here, but we don't own it?" I turned to her. "You never owned it. You occupied it. You used it. You assumed control over it. But ownership was never yours." Grant rubbed his temples. Daniel spoke again. "The trust also includes a residency clause. Any adult not named in the trust must request written permission to reside at the property longer than 30 consecutive days." Sierra stood. "You're evicting me?" "No," I said. "I'm enforcing boundaries." She scoffed, but said nothing more. Daniel handed a copy of the deed to Eduardo, then another to Isabel. "Witnesses have reviewed and signed. Bank statements have been notarized. Any misuse of Helena Hart's estate for collateral or representation is now fully severed from this property." Grant looked at me. "You planned this all along." I met his eyes. "I protected what was mine. That's not the same as plotting." He didn't argue. Lucia finally spoke. "I assume this means any future financial decisions related to the estate will go through formal review." Daniel nodded. "Correct." Isabel added, "And I'd recommend financial restitution be considered next." Daniel placed one final document on the table. "This is the amended estate plan," he said. "It removes access rights previously granted to Mr. and Mrs. Hart in the event of Helena's death. A new executor has been named." Eduardo raised his eyebrows. I said, "I'm not dying anytime soon, but when I do, I want the end of my story written by someone who knew the value of silence, not manipulation." No one spoke. Daniel began collecting the papers, stacking them in neat order, slipping them back into the briefcase one at a time. Grant finally whispered, "I didn't think you'd do it." "I know," I said. "That was the problem." Outside, the snow continued falling. Inside, the house felt different now, not just because of the documents, but because of what had been taken back. I turned toward the kitchen where the last of the pizza boxes still sat on the counter. I walked over, opened one, saw a slice still uneaten, cold, congealed, forgotten. I closed the box, tied the stack together with the twine I kept in the drawer, and handed it to Grant. "You can throw these out on your way out." He took them, no protest. Daniel turned to me. "You'll receive the final copies in the morning. Everything's official as of today. I nodded. He closed the briefcase, shook my hand, and left without another word. Isabel lingered for a moment longer. "I assume you'll be enjoying Christmas here alone," she asked. I smiled. Not alone, just with the truth. She smiled back, small but sincere. Then she walked out into the snow. Only Grant and Sierra remained. I turned back to the living room. "You can stay the night," I said, "but tomorrow I expect the guest room to be empty and the key returned." Sierra opened her mouth. Grant touched her hand. "Okay," he said. They stood. I didn't walk them out. The door clicked behind them with finality. I walked through the house slowly, one room at a time. It didn't feel like mine again. It felt like it had finally stopped being something for everyone else to claim. I lit a candle in the kitchen. Not a festive one, just plain beeswax. Then I sat at the table and opened my journal. Under the date December 24th, I wrote, "Today I reclaimed my home, not through anger, not through shouting, but through a pen and a plan. The house is quiet now, but it speaks more honestly than it ever has." I closed the book. The walls no longer echoed with expectation, only intention. I thought they might not show up the next morning. I thought they might disappear quietly, hoping to escape the embarrassment of last night's reckoning. But at precisely 10:00 a.m. on Christmas morning, Grant and Sierra returned. Not with smiles or gifts or apologies, but with quiet eyes and pressed lips. They stepped inside with hesitant steps. The house had been cleaned. The lights were low. The fireplace was burning. It felt like Christmas, but one stripped of illusion. No garlands, no stockings, just truth. I sat at the dining room table, a stack of documents in front of me, and waited. Daniel was already there, sitting across from me, briefcase open. Damien Vale leaned against the wall beside the window, hands clasped behind his back. He had asked to be present, not out of hostility, but principle. "Rules must apply to everyone," he had said on the phone that morning. Sierra glanced at Damien and looked away. Grant sat first. Sierra followed reluctantly. Daniel started the meeting with no pleasantries. "Let's proceed." He pulled out the residency clause. As discussed, the trust now governs the property. The clause states that no individual outside the named trustees may reside at this address for more than 30 consecutive days without written approval. He placed the paper in front of Sierra. "This includes you." She blinked. "You're kicking me out on Christmas." "No," I said. "I'm clarifying the boundary that should have existed all along." She didn't respond. Daniel continued, flipping to the next document. "This is a notice of outstanding expenses incurred under the Hart name over the past 18 months. The investigator compiled a list of transactions tied to both Helena's accounts and unauthorized lines of credit opened under Grant's information." He slid a stapled packet across the table. Sierra didn't touch it. Grant picked it up slowly and flipped through the pages. It was exhaustive. Clothing, travel, skincare, event deposits, luxury candle subscriptions, furniture payments. One vendor stood out, marble and oak, nearly $3,000 in custom shelving Sierra had commissioned and installed without ever asking. Daniel tapped the top page. "This totals to 52 coins, 111.47. Silence. Isabel entered the room quietly and took a seat beside Damien. She nodded toward the packet. "You will prepare an itemized repayment plan," she said. Sierra scoffed. "This is ridiculous." "No," Isabel said. "This is accountability." Grant looked up. "We can't pay all of this at once." "No one expects that," I said. "But you will begin." Sierra crossed her arms. "And what if we don't?" I looked at her directly. "Then I proceed with civil litigation." Her face paled. Damien spoke now, his voice calm. "This isn't revenge. This is correction. We all watched you cross a line. It wasn't one slip. It was a pattern. You impersonated Helena's estate. You misused Grant's identity. You lied to us." Sierra turned to Grant. Are you really letting them talk to me like this? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "They're not wrong." She stood, stunned. "You're choosing them over me?" He said nothing. Daniel cleared his throat. "You may remain in the home until January 15th, pending signed agreement of a repayment plan and signed acknowledgement of the residency clause. If not, eviction proceedings will begin." He placed a pen beside the agreement. Sierra didn't move. Grant picked it up. He signed. Then he slid the pen to Sierra. She stared at it for a long time, then slowly picked it up and signed as well. Daniel nodded. "You'll receive a copy by email and post. I'll follow up mid-January to confirm your proposed repayment structure." He closed the folder and slipped it back into the briefcase. "That concludes today's matters." Damien stood and shook my hand. "Well done," he whispered. "Some things are worth naming out loud." Isabel lingered as the others left. She walked to the window and looked out over the snowy yard. "Funny," she said, "how quiet everything feels after the noise finally stops." Then she left too. Grant stayed behind a few minutes longer. He looked older, tired, but not bitter. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For everything." I nodded. "You'll need to rebuild. Not for me, for yourself." He looked around the house. "I forgot what this place really feels like, without all the pretending." "You didn't forget," I said. "You ignored." He nodded again. Then he left. Sierra didn't say another word. When the door closed behind them, I stood and walked back into the kitchen. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt restored. This wasn't a punishment. It was repair. I poured myself a fresh cup of tea, opened the windows just slightly, and let the cold air remind me of the clarity I'd chosen. Christmas morning. No ornaments, no turkey, no choir. Just me, a contract, and the sound of truth finally echoing through the walls of my home. The light changed around noon. I was standing in the kitchen, turning off the last burner, when the sun finally broke through the clouds and spilled across the floor in long golden stripes. It caught the edge of the counter, lit up the rim of my teacup, glowed against the faded tile where my late husband once stood with our son on his shoulders. For a moment, I didn't move. The light wasn't just warm, it was clarifying. I turned toward it, holding the cup in both hands, and let it wrap around me like an answer I hadn't known I was waiting for. It was December 25th. The house was quiet, not empty, just no longer crowded by expectation. I had woken early that morning before the first light, made myself a pot of tea, lit a candle, folded a wool blanket across the back of the couch. For the first time in decades, I prepared Christmas not for anyone else, but for myself. There was no tree, just a small bowl of clementines on the table, no choir music, only soft piano playing from the old Bluetooth speaker, a playlist I had built myself, one song for every year I had swallowed silence. The knock came just after noon, not sharp, not hesitant, just there. I opened the door slowly. Grant stood outside, alone. He held a small gift bag in one hand, a key in the other. He looked tired, but not broken. His shoulders were straighter than they had been the day before. He didn't speak right away. I waited. Then he said, "I came to return this." He held out the key. I took it without a word. He reached into the bag and pulled out a small jar. Honey, the local kind I used to buy before Sierra insisted on ordering imported blends. "I remembered you liked this," he said. "I didn't come to fix anything. I just wanted to bring something that was real." I nodded. He stood there a little longer. "Can I come in?" I looked past him, down the driveway. No one else. No car idling. Just him. I stepped aside. He entered the house as if it had changed shape, and in a way it had. He noticed the silence, the neatness, the smell of cinnamon steeped in tea. He looked toward the living room and saw the absence of decorations. "This feels like a different place," he said. It's always been this place, I answered. You just filled it with noise. We sat at the kitchen table. He didn't ask for tea. I didn't offer. He glanced at the folder still resting on the table, the trust, the deed, the residency clause. He didn't reach for it. I read it again last night, he said. Every word. I wanted to find something to argue with. And did you? He shook his head. No, not one thing. He looked out the window. The snow's stopped. It has. I think Sierra's leaving, he said. She packed a bag. Her cousin's taking her back to Arizona. I didn't respond. I don't know if I want her to, he added, or if I'm just afraid of what's left without her. What's left is whatever you choose to rebuild. He nodded slowly. It won't be the same. It's not supposed to be. A pause. Then he said, You were always the foundation. I never saw it because I stood on it too long. I didn't soften. Some lessons need time to live in the bones. He set the jar of honey down between us. I don't want anything, he said. I just wanted to say I see it now, all of it. I looked at him. Then let that be enough for today. He stood slowly. As he reached the door, I added, Those who wish to stay for a Christmas based on honesty are welcome. He looked at me then, not as a mother he expected to serve, but as a woman he had finally learned to respect. I'd like to stay, I nodded once, then helped me set the table. We used mismatched plates from the upper cabinet, 2 place settings, cloth napkins, water glasses with faint smudges I didn't bother to polish. I made a simple meal, soup, bread, apples. No performance, just presence. We ate quietly. At one point, Grant asked, Do you think it's too late to change everything? I looked at him. It's never too late to reclaim dignity, I said. You just have to be willing to pay the full price. He nodded. After the meal, we sat in the living room. I didn't turn on the TV. We listened to the music, watched the afternoon light fade across the snow-covered yard. He told me stories I hadn't heard, about his first year of marriage, his job, his fears, the moments he had wanted to say no but didn't, the times he knew Sierra had crossed lines but stayed silent. I didn't judge him. I listened. When he left that evening, he hugged me. Not a quick embrace, a full one. The kind that says, I see you now. After he left, I closed the door, turned off the lights, and sat by the fire. The house no longer echoed. It breathed. I picked up my journal and wrote the final line of the year. This Christmas, I gave nothing but truth, and in return, I received peace. Then I closed the book. The flame beside me flickered. Outside, the stars came out, quiet, unapologetic, like me.